Okay. So good afternoon. Looks like it's me and Dinesh. We have some people in the waiting room waiting to make sure they filter in. So we'll wait for some more people to show up for about 5 minutes, and then we'll start. Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Anders Mikkelsen, and I'm here with Dinesh, and we're just waiting for a few more attendees to show up. So today's webinar is about cutting IT costs, specifically vendor costs, and not service levels. So we'll be talking about how to identify hidden IT costs and finding hidden savings. So I'm Dinesh. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly while we wait for some more attendees?
Yep. So myself, Dinesh Mehan, and I help companies with managing their IT cost and help reducing that cost because this is a big chunk of the cost that they have to bear. So we help with that, and we are helping large and medium-sized companies optimize their IT costs.
Oh, fantastic. And of course, I'm Anders Mikkelsen, so I'm a consultant with a background in IT management, and I've been helping companies save money on primarily telecom spending, WANs, internet, voice services, companies with $100,000, $1 million budgets, and I've also been helping companies with other types of service costs, cloud and other spending like that. So, I think we'll give a few more minutes for some more people to show up, and it'll go over. We'll start it. The general agenda is, to talk about software cost optimization and cutting IT asset management costs using data, and we're going to also talk about KPIs. So that'll be good, and just try to share some of our experience having worked with many companies over the years. Firstly, I've worked with about 100 companies, primarily focused just on telecom services, but Dinesh, tell us a bit more about some of the firms you've worked with. Yeah, if you'd like to, Dinesh, you could tell us a little bit about some of the firms you've worked with over the years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in fact, we have worked with, like I mentioned, large and medium organizations, and also a few of the small organizations. And we have given them savings in the range of more than $200,000 every year on various programs that we have implemented for cost reduction. Because when we look at cost reduction, there are multiple levers that companies can use. And in our experience, the whole area of IT asset management is generally overlooked, but there is a lot of cost savings that somebody can make out of it. So we have given more than $200,000 of cost savings on a year-on-year basis from their IT asset management cost.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can share some lessons for everybody else who this will go out to. And yeah, we're planning on putting this on YouTube as well, and maybe LinkedIn as well. So, all right, well, let's see. Let's give maybe another minute. And I don't know if this is one of your slides, but how did you get into kind of focusing on this area of helping companies with their IT vendor costs?
So one thing here, what happened, Anders, was I was earlier working for GE, so I worked for
Mm-hmm.
around 15 years. And during this tenure, we were always looking for ways to save cost. And when we started looking at the IT budgets, we found that there was so much of spend happening on the assets, we said, okay, let's go down this path and see what is happening. And when we started looking at it, we found a gold mine. You wouldn't believe we found a gold mine. We didn't procure assets for 1.5 long years.
Wow.
That's the type of optimization that we can do only on hardware side. And then software is again a big game. So that's how we got into this particular space of optimizing cost.
Wow. Wow. So what I'm hearing is you were able to find so much extra hardware lying around which wasn't being used that you didn't have to purchase anything for quite some time.
Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I
And
think
I'm going to
that's
share some more learnings in my slides.
fantastic.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start our meeting now, and let's see. Trying to minimize this. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and move on to the next screen and give an introduction here. So the Boston Consulting Group says that cost management remains an executive priority in 2025. And if you look at this article from January this year, they even talk about how executives plan to use savings from cost reduction efforts to fuel growth, especially including investments in AI and digital transformation and talent development. So you can see that even institutional consulting group like that thinks this is very important. So you can see here at Gartner where they talk about some of the strategic cost optimization opportunities. And so they have four big buckets here: vendors and contracts, IT staffing and processes, applications, governance, and IT service management, and infrastructure operations, IT security, and disaster recovery. And so for us, we see the big areas where we play is with around vendors and contracts and infrastructure operations and all of those things. And so this is that's a slide from Gartner. And then this is our webinar agenda today. So our plan is to talk about IT vendor expense reduction while maintaining service levels, keeping vendors, and saving in between contract negotiations. And I think this is important to highlight because a lot of people think of IT expense reduction and they think, you know what, we got to cut things to the bone. We got to get rid of things we like. People are going to suffer. We're just not going to be able to give good levels of service, or we have to wait for contract negotiations. And it's all the only thing that matters is either switching vendors or really being a tough negotiator every few years. So we're going to talk about some of the things we found which help reduce IT vendor expenses in between contract negotiations. So Dinesh can talk a lot about IT assets and software costs. And I'll be talking about telecom, which includes WAN, internet, voice services, both on the landline side and on the mobile side. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll look for those written questions at the end. And we look forward to going over those with everybody. So I'm going to lead off first, and I'm just going to speak briefly about telecom expense reduction and how IT departments can save 50% of their WAN, internet, voice, and wireless budget. So my findings are, despite negotiating good contracts, landline bills, that's for things like WAN, internet, voice services, are complex with 5 to 10% of the spending or the budget is spent on billing errors. 20 to 25% is spent on unused and underutilized services. And 20 to 25% is wasted because people are paying suboptimal pricing. There are other people out there who are getting better deals and you can get those deals too. But of course, vendors have no incentive to help because they want to make as much money as possible. Sales guys want to make as much money as possible, but even more so, it's not really the sales guys, they're not really that good at trying to figure all these things out either. They want to sell you products. They're not so great at figuring out if there are billing errors on your bill. And then what we found, and I've worked with over 100 companies, is that IT is too busy to do more. So overspend on inflated bills, it just repeats year after year. There's a lot of what you can call the grandfather clause. this bill looked good, 3 months ago. Okay, so we're gonna keep paying those things on the bill, which look good. And so the problem, having worked with so many companies, is that 50% of the budget is usually wasted for landline, wide area network, internet services, voice services, and IT really doesn't have time to create more visibility and dig into the details and follow through on 100% of the billing line items. Now, I've worked with a lot of companies. Definitely, I'd say 98% of my clients, probably 99% of my clients, they do a lot of work. They do negotiate. They do review the bills. It's just that they don't have time to be thorough and have an exhaustive process. And then what we've also found is that you need outside experts to get the best pricing from vendors. So you need somebody who comes from the industry. So you're going to spend a lot of money with Oracle. They're notorious. You want to find somebody who's worked for Oracle, worked with them for a long time, really understands how Oracle operates. But that guy, he might be great at Oracle, but he's not necessarily going to know exactly how to do the best things with Microsoft or to do the best things with, let's say, AWS or some other area. So you definitely want to get those outside experts, and unfortunately, you don't have those experts in your firm. Just the way of the world. So firms like Walmart, Citibank, RSM McGladrey, O'Neill Steele, and the makers of Zell, they've all asked me to help them save money on telecom costs for data and voice and mobile. So after working with over 100 companies, we found organizations spending over $100,000 annually on WAN, internet, and voice, typically overspend by 100%. Now, this is a crazy number, but we'll get into more about why that's the case. This includes spending for each office and location on things like internet connections, so dedicated internet access, broadband, Ethernet, your wide area networks, SD-WAN, MPLS, back in the point-to-point lines. Back in the day, of course, we had T1s and PRIs and all that good stuff. Same problems back 20 years ago and are still around with us today. And then there's also things like voice services. So we have, classic POTS lines but also UCAS, VoIP, toll-free, LD. Companies need some kind of voice services. And even with all the moves, people still need to be able to get phone calls from prospective clients. And costs just kind of move around into different new vendors over time. And all these things need to be managed. And having done this about 20 years, I've seen that a large spend, you're typically overspending by about 100%. So firms spending $500,000 a year can very easily save $250,000 a year or $1 million over 4 years on their landline telecom services. And as people know, you're not going to make a lot of changes typically. You kind of know what you're going to buy. You kind of made those plans. And when we come in with our clients with the plans they have, and then we show them, okay, you're spending, $100,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever it is. We'll come in and show you how to buy whatever it is you want to buy and get savings. And we found that typically that amount of savings is, 50% of whatever these companies have budgeted. So let's go into more about how that happened. So typical company, there are multiple long, complex bills for large numbers of different telco services. So there's no visibility into the details, and especially how do these billed services serve business needs? So here you can see a typical view of a telecom bill. As you can see, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of pages here. And it all adds up, and there's just a lot of data here, and there's not really effective visibility, in my opinion. There's a lot of detail, but what you really want is it's hard to have a good process with just looking at paper bills, and also a lot of key information is not on these bills, it turns out. And what that key information is definitely depends on the vendor and the bill, but that's been our findings. So usually that you have to get back-end billing data to get full, true visibility into the details what you're spending money on. Okay, so with no visibility, we have an example here. The makers of Zelle, which is a company here in the US, which people use to send money to each other pretty much instantaneously. All the big banks are interconnected with Zelle. The makers of Zelle were unaware of hidden savings, so we found $500,000 a year in savings in 60 days, and we went on to help them find additional savings, and they were thrilled by that. So we found the following cost savings. Multiple MPLS ports that should have cost $400 a month, but the vendor was overcharging. So we're talking charging $2,000, $3,000 a month for these, even though the contract said it was only $400 a month. So we fixed this. This saved $100,000 a year. The client got $48,000 in credits. And this is very, very common. This was an extraordinary result, but they saved $315,000 annually when we discovered that multiple data circuits across various bills were actually sitting unused at a legacy data center that had been shut down probably about 18 months before we got there. So we got all the unused circuits off the bill, and that was going to save them almost, $30,000 a month. So we also found additional voice to data circuits with no usage that could be removed. This included double billing upgraded circuits. So this is a common thing we've seen where, AT&T or Verizon says, "Hey, we're going to upgrade a line for you," and client thinks, "Great, this is wonderful," and then the vendor, forgets to disconnect the old disconnect the old line and keeps billing you for the old line as well as the new line, even though the old line isn't actually doing anything. So that's always a good thing to look out for and a great way to save money. And we also identified 14 data circuits with rising prices that were off contract, and they could be made less expensive by signing a new contract or installing a replacement service. So I think one of the things that's interesting here is that not every single billing line item was a problem, but they had, in this case, probably hundreds of individual billing line items which needed to be reviewed, and a large number of them had a potential way to save money, but each one was different. So I think that's one of the things too. It's not a cookie cutter solution. You got to look at the specifics of every single service you're being billed for. So after 60 days, early warning services were on track to save over $500,000 annually and $2 million over the next 4 years. And that was just the first 60 days. Our client and his boss said they were, quote, very happy because they are, quote, saving money and didn't have to do any work. So obviously I was thrilled to hear that they felt like they didn't have to do anything. That's what I think is also great about this is that if you get the right people and you're an IT executive, you can get the right people to do all the work for you. And it's very, very possible to delegate this. So I got a couple additional case studies. So we had a call center that saved $100,000 a year recurring fixing call routing. So in this example, they had a Georgia call center. They had multiple call centers, but in the Georgia call center, they had both AT&T and Verizon, fully redundant. One of them could go down and everything would just work normally, so you never even notice. But it turned out that they were sending all the outbound calling down the more expensive of the two vendors. And they hadn't realized this, they hadn't checked. But that was one of the things we checked when we realized that they were sending all their traffic down just one of the two vendors. We said, "Hey, what would happen if we moved it? What are they getting a better price?" Turned out they were. It took probably all of 2 hours for them to change it once I told them about it. And that saved them $100,000 a year. Another example was where we saved $100,000 a year on overpriced international toll-free calls. So in this example, the client had tons of inbound toll-free traffic, but it was mostly USA based. And so when they negotiated the contract, they negotiated the USA based rates. But they hadn't really realized, looking at the bills, that all that there was all this calling coming in from Canada, and they had no idea, looking at the bill, that that was a thing, and they had no idea how much they were paying per minute for that. So we did a lot of digging. We went and got into the billing detail, and that's one of the things we discovered, was that the rates were just non-negotiated. They were just kind of off the rack rates. So we talked to the vendor and we said, hey, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Client, you guys didn't really talk about this. Can you guys, give them kind of a reasonable rate? And they said, oh yeah, no, you're right. We can definitely do that. So they didn't push back on that, but that saved $100,000 a year. Took a little bit of time. I think maybe I don't remember, the client had to sign paperwork to get that done, but they didn't really have to commit to anything. And the client and the vendors, of course, wanted to save themselves the embarrassment of charging way above market rates. So instead, they only charge slightly above market rates. um, and then another example, which was smaller, but I thought was quite interesting, was we worked with an accounting firm. They had a really large New York office and tons of different lines coming in from multiple different vendors, lots of redundancy. And looking at one of the Verizon bills, I noticed there was a very small credit just for a few dollars. And it's like, oh, this is weird. I wonder what this is for. Wasn't at all obvious looking at the bill what it was for, but I did some digging, and it turned out that they were actually getting a credit for their phone calls. But it turned out they were barely sending any phone calls out this line. And when I looked into it more, it turned out that they were eligible for $1,000 a month in free long distance. And so I let the client know that, and then they were able to reroute $1,000 worth of calls every month down these lines. And sure enough, every month they get charged for the $1,000, and they'd also get a simultaneous credit for $1,000, and they wouldn't have to pay anything. So that saved them 12 grand a year. We found some other similar little tricks as well with other vendors, which I won't get into for sake of time. But those are other examples of how to look for things and how it's really possible to save money by getting the best rates, taking advantage of the discounts you have. And it's important to negotiate good rates, but it's also, there's a lot of tricks to getting making the most of what you have and what you've already negotiated, and it can be really time consuming. But I think it does pay dividends. But that's also, typically my role is to do that as a done for you service. But we'll get into that more. So let's talk about some KPIs to manage IT vendor spending and regain budget control. So you can't manage what you don't measure. So here are some things which I recommend people measure. So one KPI is an inventory coverage ratio. So this is basically to say, if you don't have a complete inventory of 100% of your services and your billing service line items, that's an indicator that your spending is not being managed. So you really need to have a complete inventory. And inventory, we have some videos on that, and I can discuss some more later. But it's basically a database of every single service, every single billing line item, where you really know what the cost is, who you're buying it from, what it is, where it's located, etc. Okay. Then so you want to have everything in the inventory, and you also want to, then the business need verification rates. So you want to know that all the services in your inventory have a documented current business need. If you're not doing this, that indicates you probably have services which you don't need and aren't being used or underutilized. Then similarly, you want to have a utilization audit score, which is just a slightly different, that the business need is, you can't have unused services which are necessary for DR. So, but utilization is, hey, do we actually know whether or not this circuit is being used? That's important to know. Similarly, you want to know if your DR circuits are actually working, even if they're not really showing any utilization. Okay, so you want to have that high score for that. And then similarly, you want to know that 100% of the services in your inventory are confirmed to match the contract terms. So the cost on the bill should match the cost on the contract. Very important. Then market rate parity score. So you want to, I would say, annually benchmark all the services you have against market rates. To do this, I think you really need a third-party expert who can let you know, hey, this is how you get the best pricing. This is what other people are paying. This is what other vendors are charging. And often you'll find that your own vendor is charging other people less, not just their competition. And so this could all be leverage to help negotiate better deals, or just get additional discounts in mid-contract. And then this is an interesting one. This might be hard to explain, but can you take your inventory and use it to predict what your next bill will look like? If you can't do that, that means there's probably something wrong with your inventory, or the way you're approaching it, and you don't really have visibility. You don't really understand what you're buying, how your costs work. You should be able to really, within a few percent, really calculate exactly what that next bill is going to look like. And there shouldn't be any surprise. So you should be able to do this without looking at the last month's bill, but instead looking at the actual inventory. Um, and then I think another big one is the realized savings rate. So of all the different types of cost savings you found, what percentage of them have been followed through? What have you actually captured those savings? Have you documented those savings, et cetera? So these are some helpful KPIs. If you're not getting really high numbers on all of these, that's usually an indication that there are additional cost savings. And you can use something very similar to this to look at pretty much any type of services spend in IT, but also outside of IT. And so it's going to apply to cloud, software as a service seats, all that good stuff. Okay. So, okay, we're coming to close shortly. So a process that works. So we create visibility. We do an in-depth review at no charge of your inventory. And so having created visibility, we have an inventory. We then review everything on that inventory at no charge. We provide you with actionable cost savings proposals. And then you, as a decision maker, we implement those proposals for you that you approve. So it's a done for you service. And then those savings will be tracked to completion and documented. So this is a process that works great. It's you can delegate everything to us, and we basically act as a volunteer who's here to help you save money. And then just to kind of review again, the best practices for reducing costs 50% is you want to have experts who understand IT and the telecom industry do the following things. So if you have a lot of time on your hands, you can definitely do some of this yourself, and you might have experts on staff. Usually we find that our clients have people on staff who could do this. They're just too busy to actually spend hours every day for the next 60 days, really getting a project like this up and running, and then following through every week to make sure that everything gets completed. So you want to have these experts analyze your vendor billing data, uncover hidden cost savings, implement those savings. And when we analyze, you want to look for those three types of savings. You want to look for billing errors, unused services, and overpriced services. And then this process, it's going to create 50% savings, but it's also going to maintain or increase service levels and keeping your favorite vendors, because you're not disconnecting anything you need or want, and you're not having to switch vendors, and you're not having to wait for contracts to expire to save any money. Of course, some savings you probably need to wait for the contract to expire, but a lot of these examples I gave you, you can start now. So we always say now is a good time to start. So this could be you. We got sent this email over saying, Lumen gave you some more credit for their mistakes billing your MPLS ports, and they removed unused circuits from the bills, and this saves you $353,000 over the next 12 months and almost 1.3 million over the next 4 years. And client said, this is awesome. Thanks, Anders. So this could be you, big savings, and you're not having to do any work. Well, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to switch it over to Dinesh, and he is going to present on the next part. So looking forward to this.
Hi, everybody. This is Dinesh. And I think, thanks, Anders, you have rightly set the tone on cost savings. And one big thing in cost savings is always about visibility. So I think that's pretty important. And one side, we have the telecom costs, but on the other side, we also have the other costs, which are the IT costs in the organization. And when we look at this IT costs, you can very well see that we have the hardware, we have the software, and we have seen that in organizations, close to around 30% of the IT budgets are getting wasted due to poor asset tracking. And this has to nothing to do with your service levels. This has nothing to do with the productivity. This is just pure money sitting in your own offices, in your own business premises that you can very well optimize. The other big challenge in the IT space, especially in the software and the hardware side, is the usage part of it. And over again, there are a lot of surveys that are conducted, and it has been found that there is a lot of software which is sitting unused on machines. It means it is assigned to the user, but the users are not using it. Are we really looking into that sort of software? No. And that also puts a lot of stress on costs, and we are buying different types of software but without using it. So it's very clear that one thing is very clear that we don't have the visibility. Most of the organizations don't have the visibility into the software and the hardware costs. And also, people are free to procure. In organizations, there is no central leadership that monitors the procurement and the usage. It's just that, okay, I want to buy this software with the licenses which are subscription. I want to go and buy it. They just go and buy it. So nobody is tracking whether it's getting used or not. And especially this is happening much more in the SaaS environment because every organization, every department feels these are the important tools that I need. So can I go and just access it? Can I go and get on a subscription basis? Maybe I used for 1 or 2 months, but then rest of the time I just keep I don't use it and I'm wasting costs out over there. And also, there is no proper process with regard to approvals and so on. So there is a proper cost control. So all of these brings us to the point that there is a lot of waste that is happening in an organization. But now let's look at how do we go about it. Most of the time, we cannot take a hip shooting decision in this particular cases. We have to very well look at what are the ITAM costs, what are the costs that are happening within the organization. So we have to systematically track them as such from a standpoint of what are the hardwares that we are using. And I have seen in organizations, especially with hardware, whenever a new employee joins, they just get a hardware for him or they order an hardware because that's how the process has been. And the old hardware is just kept, and only when needed, they bring it out. So they don't reuse the same hardware over and over again. The same happens in the software side. They buy certain licenses, but it is not being used, so they don't have a traceability. Same with the network equipment. There is so much network equipment that is lying within the organization, which might be usable but not being used because, okay, we bought it for a certain purpose, but this purpose didn't, the product was not helpful or this was not fitting in. So they just leave it there and they don't track it or they don't have any inventory of it. Then the whole item part covers the asset life cycle. You have to have your procurements. There should be a control on the procurement side, what you are buying, right from the point of having the right catalog, right to the point of are you using it, and also on the point of retirement. Because when you are retiring your IT products, whether it is hardware or network equipment, it has to go through the carbon emission norms, the ITAD. So are you following those processes or not? That's also very critical. And the goal here is how do we ensure that all these assets are fully utilized? When I say if you fully utilize, it doesn't mean that, okay, any IT asset will be used 100% of the time, but it could be like, okay, at least above 80% of the time, is it getting used, or above 90% of the time? So that's a KPI or a mark that the organization has to design for themselves. Then also from a compliant and traceability purpose, are the equipment compliant, end of life, end of support, and so on? And is it traceable? One big challenge is that organizations have is they don't have a proper identification mechanism for an asset. So when they buy an asset, they just start using whatever the asset serial number they get from the OEM, but they don't have anything like a QR code or a barcode on the asset which they can scan or which they can look at and easily track and trace the asset. That's one of the challenges that we found in organizations, and because of that, they have to always go back to the system to check it out, and that adds a lot of complexity, and people don't do that. Because of that, the cost effectiveness goes down. The reason being, they start using a lot of manual processes. So the goal is how you can automate your system as much as possible so that you can manage your IT assets throughout its life cycle, right from the point of time where a need for a buy is there all the way till retirement. So that being said, now, where I am spending more on IT assets? That's a big question that CIOs are asking, that the CFOs are asking. The other day, I was with the team and they said, Dinesh, we got a query from our auditors asking us the depreciation of on assets. So we don't even know how many assets we have. How do I even give them a number of depreciation? And this was a big issue, and it went up to the CEO of the organization, and he said, guys, I want these numbers because without these numbers, we cannot proceed. That's what the auditing firms had mentioned. And then these guys started looking at it. So we found that there were so many assets, there were so many softwares that was procured, which was lying idle. And in one of the instances, we found that there were 200 new hardware assets which were lying idle for the last 2 years. People were not even aware that these are lying there. They were just getting assets and they started using it. But these were shoved in some stock room in the corner. For one particular team, it was procured, but they never used it because that team got dissolved and they started working on something else. So nobody had a clue that these assets were ordered and they were sitting there. And one again important thing that we found was the licensing part. Obviously, there is over licensing because different teams go and procure from the same vendor. And the vendor is so smart that he will not tell you that the other teams are also using the software or they are not using the software. Their interest is only to sell the software. So we did this exercise with one of the large software OEM softwares in the world. And this organization saved close to around 1.2 mil just by consolidating the license information. So they said anybody who wants to buy a license from this vendor has to come to this particular central team to ask if they have any licenses or not. If they give a go ahead that there are no licenses, then you need to go buy. Otherwise, you don't buy. We can easily give those licenses to you if there is a license which is available in other business. And honestly speaking, the OEM came back to this organization's license management team and said, hey guys, why are you guys not giving us purchase orders? And when they got to know that we are swapping the licenses internally, they said, man, you guys have, outsmarted us because we thought we had all this information and you were very siloed. But now you guys have integrated all the systems together. So good that you guys are saving on costs. Then we also have ghost assets. There are a lot of assets that are lost. They just raise a ticket and say this asset is lost, but nobody looks into it. On the financial side also, like I said, there are redundant purchases. People keep buying over and over because the other person doesn't know. There is always a push from the CIO or the team leader that, oh, I need this. Without that, the project deliveries will get impacted. And under that pressure, they keep buying. And obviously, there is a high maintenance cost for outdated hardware. And this outdated hardware and the maintenance, there are certain third parties that exclusively do this sort of work. They charge you a premium, but they support you on the hardware, and that cost is much higher, and nobody is tracking that cost in the organization because that doesn't come in the hardware cost. Most of the people think hardware cost is only the cost when I buy it. They don't understand that we also have to look at the maintenance cost, which is again looked after by a different team. So there is an ITAM team, there is a maintenance cost team, there is a PO team. With so many teams looking at different data sets, they are never able to get the data in one place. And that becomes a big challenge. And also, apart from this, there are penalties. People buy software, but they don't read what are the licensing compliance rules, what are the different regulations they need to go for, what are the audit conditions. They are not aware of it. And when there is a non-compliance, they have to pay through their nose. That's again a big cost for the organizations. And obviously, all audit processes are manual for assets. They want to go and check it one by one, which is very time consuming. Nobody wants to do it. If they do it, it takes a lot of money. And by the time they complete the process, they get to know that, oh, there was something that we missed. So because you don't have that automation of audits, you are never out of it. You are always within it. And after some time, it becomes so monotonous that people stop doing that, and you don't have people interested to do that. So the audit process get killed. That's where organizations are spending a lot. Now, coming to the next point, where do we save costs? That's a $1 million question. How do I save cost on ITAM? One of the important things in ITAM, which people don't do properly or the organizations don't do properly, is related to reconciliation. Because your data is as good as the reconciliation that you do between your software procurement and the usage, hardware procurement and the usage. And most of the time, organizations don't have the usage data, or they don't have the procurement data in one central location because it might be scattered with different teams. So nobody has a clear view of what is bought, of what is used, and also reconciling in order to understand what is the difference, what is that, am I using more or am I using less? That never happens. And because of that reconciliation, you don't have a good data quality. Because if you keep reconciling your data regularly, you keep churning the data and keep looking at discovery and life cycle, you get to know what are the variations, or you get to know what are the gaps, and you start building on those gaps so that you are as close as possible on the compliance side. Because of lack of reconciliation tools, because of lack of proper usage mechanisms, because of lack of proper centralized location of your procurement, organizations cannot do the reconciliation process, and that leads again to a problem of not able to save cost. But if you are able to do the reconciliation well, you will be able to know what your usage is and what your procurement is, and you know exactly where you can save the money. That's the key in the IT asset management side. That's what we call also about the visibility. If you cannot see it, you cannot save it. The most important part here is seeing it. And to a large extent, on the cloud, you are able to see. But on the cloud, the change is so fast that by the time you get to know that I've changed the configuration, the cost is already out of your control. So that again becomes a challenge on the cloud side. But cloud gives you a better visibility than what you have on your prem. And other part of having an opportunity or having a way to save cost is automate the process as much as possible, the tracking and the tracing process, which I just mentioned, so that you know exactly what is getting used versus what you are paying for. And that will help you save a lot of cost on the IT side, especially on the software and the hardware side. There is tons of money that is sitting idle in organizations. Let's look at the next side. So how do I go about it? So I should have some tools to do that. Yes, there are a lot of tools. I didn't want to mention any tools here on this particular slide, but I wanted to at the same time mention what are the few important use cases and features the tools should have. One of the important features is the catalog management. 90 to 95% of the organizations, they don't have a centralized catalog for your hardware or software assets. And that's where standardization gets killed. And if you don't have standardization, you cannot automate it. So the best process is to start standardizing your catalog data. That doesn't mean that you don't have multiple catalogs. You can have many catalogs, but see that the catalog data or the data that goes into the catalog is very well standardized, structured, not only from a cost perspective, not only from a product features perspective, but also from the auditing perspective. Suppose, for example, if you're buying a SaaS subscription, what are my auditing rights? What are the rules and regulations that I need to follow? Those sort of things. Are my training licenses free of cost? Can I give my training licenses to somebody who's a employee in the organization? How long can I give? If you don't have that clarity in your catalog, people search for data for some time and they just stop there. So the best part is to have a centralized catalog management. Secondly, people don't know what has been procured versus what have been used because the systems are not integrated. So have a system which is integrating your PO system as well your asset management system, because most of the time the POs are in your PO system and the assets are in your asset management system in an Excel sheet or in some other system which are not connecting to each other, and there you go, boom, you don't know like what did I buy, which version did I buy, which particular catalog or product did I buy, and then you are gone. And now you have a PO, but maybe I may not have paid for it. I got a PO, but the PO got cancelled or for some reason. So better have an invoice system also. So your purchase, request, your order, invoice, and your assets, all of these should be very well tied together so you have the visibility. Then comes the advance shipment notice. If a vendor is shipping you some material, are you aware of what he's shipping? Is he shipping the right material so that you can accept? That's again a big challenge because I have seen in organizations the vendor ships the material to a warehouse or to a depot, and the depot team says, I don't know who ordered for this. It's just lying here. And maybe after 6 months, somebody comes and says, hey, do you have this material in your depot? This was submitted or this was delivered 6 months back. Now we need it for a project. So he's like, oh, so are you the guys who are looking at it? Yes. Okay. So you don't have data about advance shipment notice. This is a challenge. And the most important, have a three-way match. When I say a three-way match, it's all about your PO, invoice, and asset. All these three should be connected, and you should be able to trace them on a one-to-one basis so that there is a match and you are able to get those costs there. Obviously, on a tracking and traceability purpose, the QR code, barcode, have it generated automatically through a tool. Don't have a third party system that you say, okay, I have got this data now, I put it into a third party, now that will generate a QR code, barcode. Don't go for those sort of systems. Go for a systems which are completely integrated. And we have implemented this solution in one of the large organization which has close to around 90,000 employees across the globe. And believe me, this process itself has led to so much of automation, auditing control that they were not buying hardware for at least 3 to 4 months. They did not submit even a single request of hardware because they got everything on a QR code, barcode. People were just able to scan and get the information. So people don't want to run behind information. So our job is to give them the information in their hands so that they can take a decision. And that's what this QR code, barcode does it very beautifully. Obviously, you should have your asset assignment, the life cycle data with you, the asset history cards, what sort of repairs have gone into the assets. So those information will really help you. And from an automation standpoint, you can have alerts, you can have workflows, from the request to the deployment process, automated as much as possible. Because the more the automation, the less the human intervention, the better your processes would be. And also, when you have automation, you have your compliance reports at that moment for that moment. It's not that you ask for a compliance report and you get it after like 10 days or 15 days. Till then, the compliance has already moved. And we have seen this challenges in a lot of organizations where the CIO never gets the complete report and he never gets to see how many assets he has. So, in one of the case studies, we had saved close to around $200,000 for this large organization on a year-on-year basis, and they kept optimizing the processes to an extent where, in close to around 3 years, we were able to give them around $500 to $600,000 of cost savings on hardware and software on the various aspects that we work. And one other important area that we worked with this customer was on the asset age and the usage. So how much of the asset was used, we were able to calculate with the data. Like good example is aeroplanes. So planes make money when they are flying, not when they are on the tarmac. So same happens on hardware. When the hardware is being used by an employee, it's making money for the organization. But if it is sitting in the stock room, it's not making money. So we were able to go to that detail and understand what percentage during its life cycle the asset was used, and those numbers really did wonders for us. And then what are the best practices? Like I mentioned, have a centralized process. You have more of automation, more of audits, and also have a proper governance structure. And then the procurement and finance team has to work together, because generally finance is like, okay, I will do everything. Procurement, you just go and buy whatever the teams do. So it should not be like that. The procurement and finance have to be hand in glove with each other to have a better control. And along with them, the ITAM team. And one other important part of ITAM team is ITAM team touches every department of an organization, be it be HR, be it be finance, be it be security. It touches every part or every department in an organization, and that makes it more valuable. Then, what should be your implementation roadmap? So, first, assess what is your current state, where you are, what you want to do, and then define your goals around policies and governance, around the tools that you want to deploy. Look at the tools that are available in the market. Don't just go by one or two simple functionalities. Look at the end-to-end functionality of the tools as such, and educate your stakeholders. They could be the finance team, the procurement team, the CIOs, the CTOs. Educate them, and also educate them saying that this is not just ITAM for saving cost, but also it will help you improve the security of the organization. That's very important. So you put your KPIs there and start monitoring those KPIs for the organization. And then coming to what are the next steps? What should I be doing? So the most important part here is where you are in this journey from a level 0 to level 4. You can, based on your maturity, you can select where I am, assess where you are, and then decide where you want to be. So based on your business requirements, and this is very business specific, that is very organization specific. Once you decide where you are and where you want to go, then there are organizations like ours which helps organization businesses not only save cost but also help in them in their automation journey, in their optimization journey, in their journey of integration, modernization with the latest tools, so that they can save cost and also deliver value to the organization. So this is the most important part, to understand where you are and where you want to be on your IT asset management side of things. And
Fantastic.
ITAM can be used by every industry. It's not specific that, okay, only IT industry would use it. Every industry would need ITAM, because every industry today has IT assets with them. And mind you, when I say IT assets, it doesn't mean just the hardware, software. They are the APIs, they are the SSL certificates. There are different teams managing SSL certificates, but they don't have a central visibility. Okay, how many SSL certificates I have within the organization? How much money? When I'm going to, when are they going to expire? No, there are so many different pieces. In fact, some of our organizations have added telecom costs also into asset. They say this is still an asset for me, though it is a service, but still it is an asset to the point that Andrews just mentioned. Even that becomes an IT asset and you can start looking at it. So IT asset has a huge width of scope, and it all depends on the organization how they want to use it. So that's all I had from my side. And last but not the least, all of this cost will not impact your SLAs because this is all money which is going waste, sitting on the table, which you're just picking it up through a gold mine. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. I think we have a few minutes left. So one of the questions which I think could be helpful for is, where should people look first? So is there like a specific vendor or asset type to look into, which is super easy? Or what would you say is an easy first step? Let's say if you were called into, and maybe you can give a little example of kind of like a typical organization, and they said, "Hey, Dinesh, what's sort of the first project we should do to get some wins on the board? What do you think would be the easiest for the decision makers so they don't have to do a lot of work, but they can show this works?"
The easiest win would be the software side of things.
Hmm.
One is the software. The second, we have seen in some organizations SSL certificates. They buy
Mm,
so many SSL certificates and they are paying for it, and they are not using them for some reason. They are just sitting idle. So we have seen
sure.
in those instances. So software is one of the big area that you can start looking at.
And then so and I know I'm gonna guess here that would you say the first step is, yeah, let's start with software, and then you would show them, hey, this is how we build an asset, and an inventory of all your assets, or that catalog as you call it. Would that be kind of the first step if they chose software?
Yep. So you go through your catalogs, standardize your catalog, and do the reconciliation of your catalogs with your assets. So I bought 100 assets,
Hmm.
100 licenses. Am I using 100? That's the first step. And now there is a big challenge. The software part is very different and very critical and tricky because there could be a software that I have downloaded and using as a license and I'm paying, but I'm just viewing it. For example, Microsoft Project. So if I download a Microsoft Project, I pay for the license, but I might not be editing the project, but I'm just viewing it.
Right. That's a good
So if
one.
you are viewing it, then you have a different license which you need not pay. But companies are still using the license which they are paying for only for viewing. So software usage will really help you save a lot of cost.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, and I think that's what I agree with first, as well as the big first step is, let's create that inventory, and then, let us, I think that's a good thing about like with software and also with like telecom vendors and cloud is the client doesn't really have to do a lot of work. They just have to give you access to the actual data sets being held by the vendor. And they're usually quite good about keeping that. It can be difficult to track down, but once you know how to use the vendor portals, you can usually find all the information you need buried somewhere in there. And then you can then create a really complete catalog and inventory of everything, and that's like a really easy first step. And then you can go in and help the client from there. So yeah, I found that that's worked well as well on the telecom side. So great.
Yeah.
Do you have let's see, I don't think I see any other open questions at the moment. But do you have anything which sprung to mind which you think either of us should answer? Are there any questions you wish were asked?
Yeah. One point that I would like to mention as a best practice is before raising a purchase request or when you have decided I want to buy the product,
Hmm.
there should be a central team that builds the catalog. That's very important because most of the time, when you buy a product, you buy it, you go to a PO team and say, hey, raise a PO. And the procurement team is just bothered about money. Do I have the budget money? Yep. I just write anything there and I send the PO, my job is done. But the job is not done. In fact, the job starts there because now the marriage has happened, the product is going to come in, and how you are going to manage the life cycle. The purchasing team is not bothered about it. So, asset management team should take the responsibility of creating a catalog before even a PR gets raised. The minute you decide a PR, you have a catalog there. That will make a lot of.
Yes. Right. So you can't purchase an asset unless you have a plan to track it or catalog it or inventory it and kind of track the life cycle. I actually think that's great. I think that's actually a really good point. Definitely I'm gonna definitely keep that in mind. And I think that's a good point to make because it's something which in some ways is probably obvious to a lot of people that that's what you should do. But when it comes to, as you say, well, that's not, it's not really procurement's job. It's not necessarily the IT person's job. They're just trying to run the network. They don't think about, hey, what are the corporate assets which need to be managed and inventoried and reallocated, et cetera, et cetera. That's sort of like a different person's job. But often in, I think the case of IT assets or services you're paying for, or just things you have access to, maybe which you're renting. So that's an asset, maybe a short-term asset. Yeah, people don't necessarily think to manage those. But then in other cases, probably people probably do, like you probably wouldn't, hopefully. I think most organizations they have if they have leases, right? If they have property they own or they're going to definitely manage those. They're not going to let those just sit idle. At least I haven't heard any horror stories lately about that. But when it comes to other types of assets, people tend to forget about them. Like as you said, software it's invisible, or as you said, people finding hardware where yeah, we didn't have to buy any hardware for months or a year or more because we already had it. Just we hadn't bothered to keep track of it. But now that we do, we're getting much better utilization. So I think that's interesting. It's really obvious insight for some people, but one which clearly hasn't occurred to people in a lot of other areas of the organization. So that's great. Love it. Anything else we should talk about? I guess we've used up our time for today, but
Yep. How do you think on the telecom side, how does it work? Like, do they have something like a catalog, or they just go by, or how does it work on the uh, telecom side as such?
yeah, I think it's the exact same problem, which is that people get approval to buy something and they sign a contract or a piece of paper and then they buy it and then there's no asset tracking. I mean, there's no tracking whatsoever. So instead what they do, well, okay, I'm to be fair, there's there's a little bit of tracking in terms of this is a list of all the services we use and this is what our network looks like, but it's from a functional perspective. It's not in terms of like an asset tracking. It's more like and then but they don't compare the assets they own or they're paying for with the assets they're actually using as part of their network. They don't think about it that way. So what happens is people just, as I was in the earlier slide, people just kind of look at this monthly bill and they say, oh, well, it was whatever, $30,000 last month. Now it's $30,000 this month. And, we kind of compare it. I flip through it. And I'm like, oh yeah, this looks like what I paid for last month. And then all of a sudden, you're buying, that those services in the Boston office, which you moved out of like 12 months ago, and you're still paying for them because, well, they were in the last bill, and the last bill looked fine, so I'm just going to keep paying it, and nobody gets around to it because it's who has time to read closely 100 pages of a PDF, and then that's usually there's more than one bill like that, so. Yeah, usually nobody has that time to do that, except for us. And I have to admit, even I don't like to do it every month. I would actually generally hire somebody else to do it every month as well. But I definitely like to do it one time for my clients, and I do read every page of my clients' bills at least once getting started, and then I usually hand that off to another colleague to do like the monthly check-ins. Yeah, so that's generally how it works, and yeah, it's as you pointed out, that's really not the best practice if you think about it in terms of an asset you manage. You wouldn't just let your cars or whatever. You wouldn't treat
Yep.
your cars that way.
Yep, absolutely. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. Anything else we should talk about before we wrap up?
Nope, I think I'm good. Any questions from the participants here, from the
I don't
audience?
see any additional questions. So I think we're good. I think we covered everything. And but yeah, anyone who's watching this, please reach out to us. So I'm Anders Bickelson with Berlin Pacific, and BerlinPacific.com is the company website, but I'm also on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. You may be seeing this on LinkedIn or YouTube, as well as on the webinar link. And in addition to that, I've written a book, Principles of Telecom Expense Management. Goes into a lot of exhaustive detail into exactly how to do this. And you could apply a lot of this. I mean, you can literally apply basically everything in that book to any kind of services spend. Now, what Dinesh has spoken about is he's dealing with physical assets. So there's a lot of stuff which he didn't even have time to get into. I could tell by looking at his slide deck, he didn't have time to get into, which he would kind of have to rewrite my book and to tell you how to do it for physical assets because there's some definite wrinkles there. But yeah, please check out any of those. And Dinesh, just tell people about where to find you and what's the best way to reach out to you. And yes, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you have any questions or would like to talk about any of these topics or just network.
Yep. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we have our website, digitowork.com. So we'll be more than happy to help you out in your cost saving exercise, because cost savings is not always about kicking people out, but kicking inefficient processes on your IT asset management side can really keep the people in.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I think that's what's great about this is that, having worked us both having worked in IT, we both really realize that, it's no fun when people are on the outside looking in and they don't really understand what you're going through. And they're like, well, why are we paying for all this stuff? And so instead it should be about, hey, let's help you get the best value, the best bang for your buck, so that you get to have all the things you need, and that the people who work there need, both in the IT department but also in the general organization. I personally think IT products are great if they're being used. I'm not exactly an early adopter myself, but I just so understand the value of it. So it's so important to make sure that funding is there. And so it's all about, hey, how can you save money without while also getting better service levels? And I think we've shown how that's really possible. And then you have more money freed up because there's all sorts of exciting new things out there which people want to do. And it's way easier to pay for that by spending less money on old things that you don't need anymore, or reusing existing assets. It's way easier to do that than to go begging for money from somebody else. So we found that. So we hope this is helpful, and if we can be of some assistance in your journey, please reach out.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll sign off now. Take care,
Right.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye. Take care. Thanks for joining in. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much.